excited about this episode.
I'm quite excited about this episode.
So this episode, which is really exciting, we're going to be talking, well, because the whole theme of this season is visibility. So what would be really remiss of us is to not shine a bit of a spotlight on your enormous and gorgeous rebrand and website launch. Because this is the absolute epitome of showing up and standing out online. Loud and proud, authentically, as you, even though you're a sensitive soul. You're definitely walking the talk with this piece. So we've decided that for this episode, I'm going to kind of pick your brains a little bit to help our listeners to understand what their brand could and should be doing for them, how to recognize the signs that you've maybe outgrown what you've got in place now, and what you can do to get back into alignment as a conscious business owner. So,
yeah,
without further ado, how did this get started, this whole rebranding and relaunching piece for you?
I guess in a way, kind of got to go back, not to the very start, because it's a bit of a long story and everything's kind of intertwined, but going back to when I decided to kind of do a bit of a switch. So at the point of launching what was then the Nutritional Palette, which was my business name, as a web designer, at that point, I created the Nutritional Palette previously for when I was studying culinary medicine. So my idea, when I was leaving my corporate job, I was already studying my diploma in culinary medicine because nutrition was a big thing. I was super interested, been delving into it for a good 10 years, really, like quite sort of seriously in terms of, listening to the podcast, reading the books, not necessarily going into like, scientific paper territory, but, finding out who were the good voices within the industry. Because of my IBS and my sort of desperation really to try and manage it better myself, because at that point there was just so little help or support from the medical profession. And obviously with the science, we just didn't know as much as we do now, like nowhere near as much about gut health and IBS. And it obviously, as we know, it's a big topic now. So that was my kind of obvious route of like, I want to get out of what I'm doing. This is a really big passion of mine. I want to study it, signed up, loving the course. And then with COVID, it kind of just gave me the opportunity to kind of take that leap and be like, right, I want to leave that, study this full time. And then that will speed up the process. And then I can kind of get on to, this new career. And through that process, I created the Nutritional Palette because I was like, okay, well, I can get things moving, get an Instagram profile out. I was kind of already on Instagram sharing my kind of IBS story and just food and the general, like foodie pictures and, that kind of my health journey in a way. And it was nice to connect with other people. So that was kind of already there. So it's kind of like a natural development to turn it into that. Set up a website, trying to get things going. And then obviously, long story short, found that wasn't the right route for me, and that actually I needed to find, although I still wanted to be involved in that industry, it was like, how can I best use my skills, which I was already getting red flags myself about, I don't want to be moving so much away from the creativity, because it's just a big thing through my life that I've always just kind of come back to the creative element, like my drive to be creative and to put things out into the world is just always so strong. So it's been a bit of a journey, that whole thing, but I won't bore everyone with it. But I made the decision at that point that I didn't want that to hold me back, because it was like, I've already got a website, I've already got an Instagram handle, I've already got people following me. I just need, this is a big pivot, but the name isn't totally out of the way. I knew I needed some time to kind of, okay, what does this new business look like? It was kind of a bit of an epiphany, and was like, right, I just got to get going on it because, you know, there's no time to waste kind of thing. And didn't want the whole thing of like, oh yeah, but the name's not right. I need a new brand, and I need a new this, and I need a new website. I just like, okay, I could just switch the pages, you know, tweak the copy. It's not going to be perfect, but I need to get going. And so that's how I kind of launched as the Nutritional Palette. And obviously that first year in business, as we know, is that kind of really important year, isn't it, where you're working things out, you're starting to work with clients, you're finding out what you like doing, what, you know, where you are really excelling at, and then refining that of like, who do I really want to work with, you know, thinking more about my values, and kind of, it's a big thing, it's a really big thing to suddenly come out of, if you've switched from a kind of corporate structure career, and we've talked about this before, haven't we, into like working for yourself, like everything's new, and it's almost like it's really exciting that I can decide all these things for myself, but it's actually also really overwhelming. So it was kind of like, you know, taking it step by step, and I knew at some point I would need to come back and relook at the brand, the business, where I wanted to take it, but I kind of gave myself that space of like, okay, I'm just going to experiment and play around and sort of see where I want to take it. So that's kind of how it got started. But obviously there's that inevitable point where you're like, this isn't right anymore.
Yeah, so why don't we talk about that? So how did you realize that the nutritional palette no longer fit, and how was it impacting how you showed up? Was there a particular tipping point for you?
Yeah, it's one of those things that it sort of gradually builds, and it sort of starts as a niggle where you're kind of like, well, this doesn't really explain what I do, you know, and just thinking from a very practical perspective, thinking from like SEO, you know, I remember looking at my stats on Google Analytics, and it was like, you know, I was being found for people looking for like makeup palettes, you know, and I was like, okay, that's fair enough. But you know, it's not really saying what I do anymore. And obviously I was working with, you know, sort of fitness instructors, coaches, psychologists. It was still within that kind of, within the health, wellness, well-being area, you know, people that were helping others to, you know, improve their health, improve their well-being, which is what I really, you know, am still passionate about. But it wasn't solely nutritionist, and I didn't want it to solely be nutritionist, as much as, you know, I've got obviously knowledge in that area. I didn't want to exclude, and obviously the name was just very strongly pointing to nutrition. So it's kind of one of those things where you start feeling disconnected, you start feeling out of alignment, and obviously that, as I say, starts at a niggle, but it builds up and builds up and builds up until you do get to that kind of breaking tipping point, or I did anyway, where, you know, you just notice that you're struggling to kind of find the right words, you're struggling to write a newsletter, write a blog post, everything, you're not really focused, like things are feeling like, you know, I kind of knew who I was talking to, but I guess it wasn't really niched enough, and I wasn't really feeling super connected. Like, yes, this, it gives you that energy, doesn't it, when you kind of, you've got your mission. And so my mission felt a little bit blurry and a bit, I don't know, quite sure where I'm going with it. And so then everything becomes quite hard work. And obviously that's going to show, isn't it? It means that you're not going to necessarily connect with people. Then you start not really putting yourself out there because you're like, well, I can't really find the right words, and I can't really articulate what I want to very well. So I'm just not going to write a newsletter or write a blog post or do those things. And obviously then you start not really showing up, which obviously has a massive impact on your business. It affects your confidence. And for me, having had a very good experience of feeling out of alignment and feeling like you're pretending to be someone else or operating in a world that doesn't really fit you, is anxiety inducing. exhausting. And those feelings were starting to come back of like, this doesn't feel right. My website wasn't bad, obviously, as a web designer,
No, it was a lovely website.
It was fine. And it was, people were looking at it and booking calls and booking me, but I didn't feel really proud of, like, I knew I'd moved on. And I put a lot of heart and soul into that, but I was kind of like, it's not talking about the right message anymore. I just got that feeling of like when I was on, kind of like a group call or somewhere where I was kind of networking, I'd be like, oh, everyone share their website or share their contact details. I'd be like really reluctant and be like, oh, like, yes, here's my website, but with the caveat of like, that doesn't really explain,
Don't judge me on it.
like where I am right now. And it was just, once you hit that stage where you're not putting yourself out there and you're really reluctant to share your brand or your website, then it's time to change. And I will caveat that with, obviously, in those early stages, you might not feel, you've got to give yourself some time. Like in the first year, you don't want to be like spending all your time like switching your brand and tweaking and fiddling with your website a million times because it doesn't quite feel right, because obviously in those early days, you are just finding out what works for you, and that does take time, and it does require a bit of patience. But I think if it's building up to a level, you just know. And obviously as a sensitive person, it's maybe a bit more of a physical feeling for me and maybe other people, but it was that kind of full body no. which
you trusted and listened to.
Yeah.
Which is so important, and we do celebrate that.
Yeah, and that takes trust, and that takes some,
courage. It takes courage.
Yeah, it does. Because it's one of those things, isn't it? It's always quite hard to say sort of goodbye to a chapter and start something new, and that has its own feelings around it. But I think if you're no longer feeling kind of excited about your business, if it's not giving you that extra energy and it's not preparing you, like your brand and your website should honor where you are now, but it should also leave room for you to grow. There should be that feeling of expansion. And if you're feeling like this, like I was with the Nutritional Palette, this is not going to allow me to grow my business in the way that I was starting to envisage, there's no room for that. Then that is time, that probably is the right time for a rebrand.
Yeah, and to come back to what you were saying earlier on, not obviously for us it's obvious, not necessarily for our listeners. The nutrition piece was one of our sort of golden threads that we both followed, that passion and interest, and we both studied nutrition, and we both kind of thought we were going to be working in that sphere when we left the corporate arena, and then found that actually there was a better way of serving that audience through creativity, which is obviously a really powerful realization in and of itself. But that whole reaching a point where your brand is keeping you hemmed in, we talked about this before, you and I, possibly offline. I went through that process as well, because again, how we met was kind of through the health bloggers community, and I was canny attitude online, and I had this health blog, and then I tried to make that blog into a website when I realized I wanted to start selling services, and that didn't work for me. And it was the brand itself that was keeping me small and hemmed in. Which is why I'm now just me online. So I think it's a really common experience that is, again, one of those things that probably isn't really talked about that much. So hopefully our listeners, if they are resonating with this and going, yes, that sounds like me, this is giving them a little bit of reassurance that it's perfectly normal to feel this way. So
And it's good. I mean, it shows growth, doesn't it? It shows that you are developing and you're growing. So although it can be unnerving at the time and like, oh, how do I work my way through this? And what is me tinkering and what is me actually really needing to take, go back to basics maybe and relook at things. I can understand that might feel a bit unnerving.
Yeah. So you kind of started to touch on this, but let's look more deeply at what should our listeners' brand be doing for them? What could it be doing for them? Rather than that, some of this tipping point stuff that we've been talking about. If we go into the realms of what is possible.
Yeah, I think, as I mentioned, what's really important is that it gives you room to grow, that it articulates in the best way possible your vision for your business. It should connect with your ideal clients. It should feel quite magnetic to your ideal clients, and actually also repel those that you don't want to work with. And I listened to an amazing podcast with the brand stylist, and she talks about this a lot. And she referred to them as the anti-muse, because she talks about ideal clients being muses, and then we also have an anti-muse of the ones that ideally are not the most enjoyable to work with, or are not the right fit because of your values, because of your mission. So really your brand should do a lot of that heavy lifting for you. So by the time people actually do reach out to you, they've kind of gone through that filter. So your brand and your website is really, and your messaging is like a filter of where people are reading that, the visual aspects, the whole emotional connection to that should feel good for your ideal clients. And so therefore it's very important when you're looking at your branding to go and do that deep work, because it's not about you. I mean, yes, you want to feel connected and aligned to your brand, but it's really more about your clients. And so it's like getting that balance between what feels right and comfortable for you and translates your message, but also what is going to connect with them. And so that's where I came to you, wasn't it? I was like, okay, I know, I could sense and I could feel kind of where I wanted to go with things, but we all I think hold ourselves back to a certain extent. And it was, what was great with you is that you were very good at helping me look at the bigger picture and kind of like, okay, let's not just look at, yes, you create websites and yes, you create branding, but what is the ripple effect of that? And it's kind of feels a bit overindulgent to be like, oh, what, the impact I have on the world, but you do, when you really actually look kind of with a bit of a micro lens at, okay, I help somebody feel more aligned. I was weirdly going through the same process as what obviously I take a lot of our clients through and my clients through. I was having to go through my own process, which is harder than it seems.
It always is.
For yourself, you're like, I know what I'm doing, it should be easy. Like, it's actually the worst. That you kind of feel like, oh, who am I to sort of feel like I have this impact or mission in the world? But actually, kind of remember feeling really fired up after our conversation, because it was like, no, I could, you gave me that permission slip to be like, no, you can be honest with yourself and see that you are having this impact, and what does that mean to that person, and how are they then showing up in the world, and how does that impact their family, how does it impact their own health, how does it impact their confidence, all those things. And that's when you realize that there's real power in something that it goes way beyond just a logo and pretty colors and a pretty website. And that's what I'm really passionate about. And so it was like, how do I articulate that was was actually very hard. And so it can feel like, I think in the world we live in, the fact that it moves so fast, I catch myself doing this quite a lot, is that you kind of want to get to the end point really quick. You kind of like, right, I just want to get to
tick, tick, tick,
and move on.
Yeah.
And you don't always see the value, because you're like, oh, that takes time. I don't really have time. I want to get to the end. You know, it's a bit like, I don't want to read the whole book. I just want to kind of read the conclusion and then like done.
Yeah.
And you can't with this stuff. If you really honestly want to create something that lasts, because I don't think you shouldn't be rebranding like every couple of years. Like you should be maybe making a few tweaks, updating your wording a little bit. Maybe your services have shifted slightly, you know, that there'll obviously be developments and shifts, but you shouldn't be reinventing yourself every few years if you do the work in the right way in the beginning. And I think that's where we're so passionate, aren't we, about that foundational work. And we've talked about it so much on the podcast, and obviously I had to go through that myself with like, okay, what is my mission? What are my values? What do I want? You know, my values as a person are very strongly tied to my business values, but obviously there's some differences in terms of, you know, your business is a different entity, so it can have its own kind of personality in a sense. You know, what are those values? What are the most important things? Who is my ideal client? And again, you need another permission slip, I feel like, sometimes, to be like, you know, obviously sometimes you're just kind of trying to survive in your business, and you know, you need to earn money, you need to pay the bills, and you know, all the other stuff. But then it's nice to be able to step back and be like, okay, who do I really want to work with? You know, not necessarily just the bread and butter, but who is really gonna make me feel excited, who is going to give me that energy and that excitement, you know. And I'm not saying like you'll get that all the time,
no,
but it's good to have an idea of who that is, and so much then stems from there. And I think, well, we know that that connection means that what follows becomes much easier. There's less friction, you know, it's a lot smoother, the words come easier, you know, once you've kind of understood the messaging and the kind of words that connect with those people. You have that vocabulary to pull from, and it just feels a lot more natural. So I think that cannot be underestimated, spending time on doing that work. And it's not easy. Like it takes a lot of soul searching, you know, because we are our businesses, you know, we're not a big corporate entity, we're not hiding behind a big banner, like we are our business. So that, you know, is important, but can be very vulnerable, and you have to be okay with that vulnerability.
This whole process is a soul searching process. It's a getting to know process. It's a learning what makes you tick, what makes them tick, and kind of bringing that all together, and building something slowly, brick by brick, rather than, you know, rushing headlong into a whirlwind. And I think this whole process of discovering who your brand is and how that shows up in the world, if you are struggling to, you know, really connect in with how that sits and how that feels, I think that, you know, thinking about building a lasting romantic relationship is probably the most appropriate analogy for that.
Yeah, exactly. And it is a bit of a getting to know yourself process as well. It's like, you know, you're kind of rediscovering things, you're reclaiming things. It's a really liberating point in your business, I feel, because, you know, it also pulls in things like, how do I want to be working? In what way suits me as my, you know, my personality? Am I somebody that's that loves public speaking, that loves talking to groups, that loves doing group things? Or am I more of a one-to-one? Or am I, all those things? I think it's, you don't always kind of realize that you can mold your business in a way that suits how you work best, because that's really important. And that was something, again, I mean, ongoing, but definitely I had to relook at, is, kind of really tapping back into my creativity and honoring it and making sure that it's protected and that it is harnessed in the right way, that it's nurtured, and seeing it as an important business tool, which is quite hard, I think, for any creatives. We're kind of not used to really looking at it in that way. And so it's like, how do you make sure that you have your best energy for your clients? And all those kind of things will come into play in terms of how you then mold that business. And that plays into, I think, what we're going to talk about as well in this episode is, the business name and what's the most suitable kind of avenue for you to go down. So that kind of taps into that vision piece. But I think if you're willing to go through that process and kind of get really clear on those things, it fast tracks you, because then everything else that comes after it is easier and quicker, and you have a much better idea. And obviously if you're doing that work and then you're coming to either you or me or other copywriter, designer, whoever to work with, and you've got a clearer picture, I mean, obviously we have those processes in place to take you through that, but it's much easier to start from that point rather than I need a new website, or it's like, okay, but where do we start from that? You need to kind of go back. We can't just like zhuzh it up.
The zhuzh.
Unless you don't need the rebrand and it is just a case of, I need to just update a few things, like obviously that's fine. But I think once you go through that process, kind of coming back in a very long-winded way to your kind of original question of like, what should it be doing for you? The outcome of that is, it gives you confidence. I think that's one of the most important things I see with how I felt myself and seeing my own clients go through that process, is that confidence to be like, I'm dying to share this. I want to get this out there. I want to help people. I love it. I feel connected to it. I feel totally aligned with, the colors and the fonts and the logo and the look of it and the wording. That should give you that confidence and that energy to really propel your business forward, and also excite you, like that could trigger a lot of ideas of where you want to take it in the future, and the feeling that there's room to grow and develop. And that's, I think, what a really good brand should do for you.
Which is a lot like the analogy of a relationship, right? A really good relationship. Yes, it feels vulnerable, it takes work, but it gets to feel good.
Yeah, exactly. And not,
we'll want more of that.
Yeah. And as you said before, like not to feel hemmed in or like, oh, I'm trapped now. Like I can only do this because I've said that, these are the parameters of it. It needs to serve you, and you should feel proud of it. You should feel proud of it. Because then you're going to show up, then you're going to share, then you're going to get out there a lot more. You're going to be proud when you hand over your business card, or say, here's my website, or here's my Instagram handle, or here's my LinkedIn profile, like whatever it is, you'll be more than happy to share that with people. And what will that mean? It means that you're showing up as confident. That means that more people will be attracted to you because you've got good energy. Hopefully they'll be connecting, obviously, with all those visuals that we talked about. And you should be booking more people because you're actually going to be showing up and getting out there. So that's only going to go one way, isn't it? I mean, obviously there's a lot of work still in between that, and you don't just launch, as I'm at that stage now of like, the world. it's
Well, it's not an if we build it, they will come.
yeah,
You've got to continue the momentum we were talking before we joined this recording. Your new website is out there. It's beautiful. Your branding is out there. But now, as much as we celebrate that, yes,
yeah,
it's there.
and
What's
do take
next?
time to celebrate it. Yeah, you've got to keep that momentum going, and you've got to keep resharing and blogging and doing those things that's gonna keep you showing up and keeping being in front of people in the way that feels comfortable for you. I mean, I'm not talking about a kind of, you know, being out there that you have to be like, you know, suddenly because dancing on reels and things. But it's in your own way, whether that means like, yeah, you know, I'm proud to kind of now start really building a mailing list. And you know, for my business, one of those things, and I guess the name change, obviously we haven't even said, like, obviously went from the Nutritional Palette and now Kohlab Creative, sort of Kohlab Creative Design Studio. You know, that for me encapsulates a lot of where I hope my business to go in the future. And the Kohlab piece is very much around collaboration, obviously our work together, fed into that, and with other creatives of like, hang on, you know, we've got something quite unique here where we have this lovely network of great professionals that can bring a really holistic service to our clients. And obviously we'll talk about that in other episodes where we've got lovely case studies of our clients sharing their thoughts on that, but how that can work really well. And so I could see that being a big part of my business. And for me personally, like, I learned quite quickly that me just being on my own completely was actually quite a struggle for me. As much as I love having my own autonomy, and even in all the jobs I've done, I've always kind of been like a little bit of a satellite, because I like doing my own work. I like, you know, I don't need to be micromanaged, all those kind of things, but I obviously do get energy from other people. And so I didn't want my business to be, that's where it came into the name again, like Kohlab, co being KOH, meaning island. And it was about, you know, we are our own little individual islands with our own businesses, but that doesn't mean we have to be alone. We can connect up, support each other. And so a big part of where I want the business to go is to kind of create a bit of a collective. I'm so passionate about small businesses, independent businesses. And obviously we are going through tough times, and sadly I am hearing more and more of like, oh, another independent business has gone under. And I just feel like, you know, the more we can support and rally together and share in that journey and not feel so alone, the better for everybody. And I'm really, really passionate about independent businesses being supported and like kind of taking on these big corporate, you know, I'm so frustrated by, you know, won't go into it on this episode, whole other episode in itself, but you know, especially when you're looking at kind of the food industry and things like that. Oh, you know, so the more we can support and harness that, and obviously that's a big part of my values and a big part I wanted to bring into the business. And again, the Nutritional Palette couldn't have done that, whereas Kohlab Creative feels like it has room for that in the future.
Very expansive, isn't it now?
Feels exciting, as it should do.
Yeah, it should. Again, it gets to be fun once you've put in that, you know, the foundations and the groundwork. It gets to be fun. And I feel like stuff slotted into place quite quickly for you.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the process was quite long, but because I was just busy in my business, it was kind of like I had to keep sort of putting off the rebrand. And that is where I did get to that tipping point, because all in all, it was about 6 months. And in some ways, I was quite happy to let it sit there for a bit, because I wanted the name to feel right. I started, with the mood board and some ideas, and I kind of sat with that for quite a while and kept coming back to it. And I was like, yeah, that feels, my intuition was like, yep, that's right. And I thought, okay, well, if after 6 months I'm still feeling really comfortable and aligned with this, then I know it's right. I'm not saying everyone has to take 6 months, but
No.
It is a bit of a process when you start thinking about it. And but as you said, like once things started moving, then it was like, okay, yeah, it all started to flow, which is an amazing feeling in itself. And that is where I was kind of doing all this work in the background and got to the point where I was like, I just can't hold it in anymore. Like this has to come out. And it was like, okay, it's not going to be perfect. I'm not going to have, everything ready at once. The first thing I did was I had to change my Instagram handle. I was like, I can't handle it anymore being the wrong net. Like it's just too painful now.
Yeah.
And so I just rolled it out in bits. But like no one's looking at my business as closely as you are yourself. So to you, it seems like a big thing. But other people are like, oh, that's changing. Okay. Yeah. And then I did get to the point where obviously, launched the website and the branding was a bit more forefront where I kind of did announce it. But and it was lovely to have somewhere to point people in the right direction that actually felt like it represented me. But yeah, in some ways it kind of did slot into place quite quickly once we got that wording down, that good old mission statement, which I still come back to.
I love that you're still using that.
Yeah, it's a magic tool, I tell you.
And that flow piece that you mentioned a moment ago, that is a real key theme of your new branding as well, isn't it? So it's lovely that that's come through so strongly.
Yeah, and there's so much that is tied into it for me. I mean, obviously, the sea is a big theme throughout the branding, and that is hinting at our move to the sea, and I kept going back to the sea in my process. So I actually came up with the name and a lot of the fundamentals when I was actually on holiday, and I wasn't going on holiday to be like, I'm going to work, but I was just like, this is a space where I've got time, and I just set aside a few hours on a sun lounger, by the ocean, and was like, this is a good space for me to be in to start thinking, okay, about the future and where I want to take this new, this rebrand. So it all kind of interconnects, which is lovely.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
So I'm actually going to put you on the spot now. We've asked this question to a couple of our podcast guests this series, so I'm going to ask to you. And no, I didn't let Sammy prepare for this one. What one thing do you want listeners to take away from this episode? So if we started the phrase, "Dear soulful business owner, I wish you knew this," how would you fill it?
Dear business owner, I wish you knew how amazingly confident and vibrant and magnetic and memorable your business can be if you dive into that groundwork and really look at your mission, your values, and really be true to yourself in that process. I think you'll be surprised by just how powerful that is.
Amazing. So if our listeners are sitting there going, I feel like maybe I need to go through this kind of process, do you have any tips for them on how to get started or prepare?
I think don't underestimate the work involved. Not to put people off, but I think it does take effort and it does take some time. So, obviously if you're kind of busy in your business, you're dealing with lots of client stuff, you're going to need to set aside some time. Like, don't underestimate that you need to do some work. And if you do end up getting help from people like us, then it's not like we're there to do it for you.
Yeah,
We'll guide you and help and pull out you know, little strings of magic that maybe you can't see. And I think that is really helpful, actually, having an external pair of eyes on your business to really kind of help you uncover that magic. But just don't underestimate, you know, the time and effort that that does take. But as I said, it will fast track you later. And that's the thing, is that it's really, as much as it's hard in this world right now when everything's so quick and instant gratification, to kind of feel like you want to maybe just, all right, I just want to change everything now, and like, yeah, you know, it does take some time. And if you put that thoughtful process in, it will reward you and it will last. I mean, there's no reason why your brand can't last you a good 10 years if you're not following just the trends and what's trendy right now, and you're building something that is true to you, connects with your clients. It will last the test of time. And yeah, there'll be some tweaks and a bit of a refresh or something maybe, you know, down the line, but that's the power it has. And so really it will save you a lot of time in the long run.
Super. Well, we have jammed so much into this conversation. There's so much good stuff there.
Been a big one. A lot of gold dust in this, I feel like. It was a lot of important things there, not because we were using me as a little case study, but because of that messaging around what it can do for you. I think is massive, and it's really transformative.
Yeah, and it's a really common problem. This tipping point and the feeling of ick with your brand and what do I do next. We see a lot of business owners going through this. So if you are feeling like we've been saying a lot of what you're feeling when you're listening to this episode, please know that you're not alone.
Definitely. And reach out if you want to, you know. It's not always nice when you kind of get really into your own head about it. So feel free to come and chat to us or drop us a message or a voice note.
Well, what is the line? We're all islands, but
don't swim alone.
There we go. We're all islands, but we don't swim alone. Beautiful.
Lovely.